Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you, everyone, for contributing today. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. It just depends on where in the world you are and your point of view. And so we have so much to cover. And I want to thank you all for being here and being part of the participation, because as you can see, we've gone through a very important Knowledge Seekers workshop. Has tremendous effect. And I think we have, quite rightly, can claim that we have had an effect as we've stepped back from the verge of World War III. And so welcome, everyone. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We're involved with the basic transmutation series now. Today's subject is going to be Cornerstone. And my name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is September the 1st, 2024. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So welcome everybody from North America and from all the continents around the world, because this is what makes this meeting so strong. It gives us a chance to discuss on a one-to-one basis of what's been going on, and add to the knowledge and try and distill the thousands of hours that we see of the teaching. As we can see in the list of basic classes that we started back in 2020. So there, even that is a lot to go through. But we are in the basic transmutation, and we discussed the spherical nature of the x-axis. And we have other things that we're going to add to that, and we're trying to figure out. But we're often said that we're matter state dominant. And in that way, we establish cornerstones. And so let's see what we're talking about, because we're on the hesitancy highway. And this is the lowest energy state. So we have to understand, as the lowest energy state, it makes life hard. And it's a hard road to hoe, as they say. But, you know, when we start to lay down markers, we wonder if man is a space litter bug. And it would be rightfully to ask, are we the only space litter bug? Because, you know, we are searching for outer space. And in that process, we're leaving a trail of garbage down the plasma highway to our little pie in the sky. And one has to ask a question, why do we have to accept that little pie in the sky? Why are we denied the rest of the pie? Or is that just a figment of our imagination? So as we discuss in the books of Marin Tepikoli Keshe, book number 1 is the universal order of creation of matter. And in that process, the most dense of all matters, of course, is the physicality. And it is in the physicality that we lay down the cornerstones. But in book number 2, The Structure of the Light, what kind of structure does the light have? Is there a cornerstone of the light? And then book number 3, The Origin of the Universe, I don't remember seeing that cornerstone. But there is one cornerstone that we have not laid down on this planet, and that is world peace. And so for 341 weeks in a row, Rick Crammond and the Universal Council has brought forward one planet, one nation, one race for justice, for world peace, because that is the ticket, that is the cornerstone to achieving congruence with the universal community. And there are laws, there are man-made laws, there are universal laws, and we see them as commandments. And so this has been an ongoing discussion, not only of the commandments that we've been given, but of the commandments that we have been hidden from us. So our goal is to get on that plasma highway. And where exactly is that plasma highway, and what is the relationship of it to the transmission highway? Because that's where we're on. We're on the transmission highway, and we're pretty proud of the things that we transmit. And what's the reference? Well, the reference is how we were transmitting things maybe 100 years ago. And so maybe we were sending messages by smoke signals or drum beats. And now we are communicating with wireless cell phones and with internet. But there is a transition highway that we have to recognize that doesn't speak in words. It speaks in emotions. And now we are on the transmutation highway to understand how we can elevate into this higher speedway, because it operates at many orders of magnitude faster. And so we seem to think that with our little piece of pie, of the MAGRAPH pie, that if we can increase to the speed of light, that we can achieve what we want to achieve and find out where exactly we are. But what we found is that the speed of light is a constant transmission. So we need to figure out what has the variable transition of the speed of light. Because is that speed of light just part of the pie? We would be, I think, correct in assuming that the speed of the light is the whole pie. So why are we just getting that little piece of the pie? Is it because of our understanding that the universe is only 99% hydrogen? Is that correct? Or is the rest just garbage? So we have a conflict in our own existence between what we call affinity, which is the common denominator, and the prejudice, which is an artificial common denominator to segregate us. So terminology became a very important thing. And when we started, we tried to relate transmission, transition, and transmutation to how it's affected by what we call in basic construction, the X, Y, and Z axis. But we don't build things in a linear fashion. The world has a rotation, a polarity, and a field strength. And then we found that we can actually transition these dimensions. And so if we transition one, we can transition the other. So the transition dimension of the X, Y, and Z axis will also manifest. And in that process, we will change our transmission dimension. So in other words, we will have an elevation. Both will go through the ups and downs of what we call transition. And then we can change our position, what we call transmutation. So in other words, from the current transmission dimension, go through a transition dimension and manifest in a different transmission dimension via the understanding of transmutation. And so here we are discussing basic transmutation, and let's see if we can figure this thing out. So we've always talked about surface to volume ratios because the two dimensions that we always recognize are the feeding dimensions. And we say that 1 and 1 is more than 2. And the reason for that is because we don't lose the first one. And we also have to recognize that the other one is not the same one. So we have a continual of feeding, and so the result is a feedback. And this becomes very important to understand, because if you are creating something, so you're bringing things together to create. So let's say, in other words, you can't drive steel, but if you incorporate steel into a car with other parts, what you get, you can drive. And so things have to come together. And when they do come together, they become synergistic, which means more than the sum of the parts. So if we only have one part plus another part, then the two together are more than the sum of the parts individually. And since we are the observers, we're none of those three dimensions. We're in the fourth dimension ourselves. And so this is interesting. It gives us the position of being an observer, but it also means we need to be a participant. And a lot of people are using the participatory status as being a fudger, and they kind of round things off. Well, there is a lot of forgiveness in that. It's not as precise as it needs to be. And so how does that forgiveness manifest itself? So when we did the cups of life, we specifically were looking for an emotional cup and a physical cup. But the forgiveness comes in the relationship between the two cups. And so it represents an emotional strength, which represents the strength of the inner space. So even though we were very specific in our nanocoding process, which is part of the monatomic science, which is part of the one step higher than the atomic science, then we go from a extremely precise to kind of a nebulous orientation. And the reason for it is because we have now incorporated the field as opposed to incorporating and focusing on one point. And that is the point. So when we look at the cups of life, we see that the elements in there are themselves a combination. So we have copper wires and copper coils and nano-coated copper coils and nano-coated sheets, and all these things are working together. And in that process, by changing the individual components, we change the cups of life. We have different ganses. Some people call these ganses oxides. That would be in the chemical stage. But in the plasma stage, these are ganses. Gas is a nanosolid. And so we see carbon dioxide, calcium carbonate, copper GANs, zinc GANs, water GANs, and amino acid GANs. And yes, so these are all hybrids. and of course, gold GANs, which seems to get everybody excited. But what they are is a representation of energies in motion and their form artifacts. So even when we look at the frozen GANs ball and we want to see what kind of energy is that, what kind of energy is emanating from the frozen GANs ball. So we have gravitational core, and this GANs ball is actually the cornerstone of the GANs. And it is from that cornerstone that we get these magnetical hair-like lines. And we see that these lines are nanotubes and they're hollow. So this is the basic science, except for one small detail. And that is if we remove the GANs ball. If we remove the cornerstone, would we be able to achieve the same result? Well, all we have to do is look at the gravitational conformation of this Earth, and we can see that we have hydrogen. And since hydrogen is a clear gas, how can we see it? Because it manifests in physicality a color spectrum, and that color spectrum has more than one color, but it's a unique assortment of colors, and we call it the spectrum, and that is the fingerprint of the hydrogen. And it is here in its gravitational context on Earth. And where did it come from? And so we see that it came from the magnetical interaction with the field forces of the sun and the Earth, and of course the Creator. And so it all came, and that's our gift. The hydrogen is the gravitational gift that came from the Creator. And as a result, on this planet, we were able to measure the potentiation of hydrogen, which for most people is a chemical analysis, which identifies whether the water that the hydrogen creates is either acidic or alkaline. And we say water because, of course, in order to create water, you need the hydrogen. But then, of course, you need oxygen as well. So this table reflects the potentiation of oxygen as well. But we call it the potentiation of hydrogen. So when we split the hydrogen and the oxygen into different groupings, one side becomes acidic and one side becomes alkaline. And that particular grouping, when it's split, always totals 14. And so the midpoint is 7. So what we have to understand is that the 7, as it relates to the acidic group, is the highest value, and the 7, as it relates to the alkaline group, is the lowest value. And so you take the highest and the lowest and bring it together, and it totals 14. And so this becomes true if you have a pH of 4, you would automatically have a pH of 10, 10 and 4 being 14. But 6 and 8 is also 14. And so you can have different potentiation layers. And so through the y-axis, we can transition all of these layers to figure out where we are. And in that process of what we call the zipper transmission, we have motion. And so this x-axis dimension, which is a rotating field above the ground, can go from one pH level to another pH level. And so that is the different potentiation layers facilitate the motion. So that becomes a question, is how do we do that? And do we do that? And do we understand that? So if we look at the way the Earth is made, and we see that the x-axis involves rotation and the y-axis involves polarity and the z-axis involves the dimensions based on interdependence. So we see the different planes of the Earth, and we see all the periodic table of elements of the Earth are on the Earth, and they were here before us. So some way, somehow, all of these elements are going through a pH transition as well. And so they're going up and down. And then, of course, they also change in size. And of course, they also change in density. So we have a density transition balancing that is also a part of this. So we call this a balancing between the magnetic and gravitational field forces. And so, of course, well, the question is, how far down can you go? So with our current equipment, in terms of our small m matter state physical state, we have gone down to the picostate value. But when we look at the creation of the universe, we can't see how it is created. So we see that the universe exists from energy. And although energy is not visible to us, we see the form artifacts of what energy is creating. So energy is always a charge in motion. And the reason it is a charge is because the energy is always positive. So what is the charge? The charge is the motion and the direction of the motion, because energy is always in motion. It never stands still. You can't grab onto it. Maybe you can grab onto a battery, but you don't know how much energy is in that battery until you test it and until you hook it up into a circuit. So you can hold the battery, but you can't hold the energy, and you have very little control over that, because the full control is in the physicality. But we see that all things are working in combination, even in the physicality. And so when we look at the structure of light and how the light moves, it obviously is moving between two structures. But in the creation of the universe, those two structures don't have to be at the same energy level. So when we're looking at the charge and what we're saying, well, the charge is reflecting the direction of motion. And so the charge is encompassed in a parcel. And that parcel is a package where you have this polar rotation and you have this field rotation, and the two are working together. And then depending on the polarity, it tells you which direction the energy is flowing. So basic principles tell us about the negative charge principles, that the negative gives and the positive takes. And if it gives and takes from itself, then that energy is binding. But if it shares that energy with others, then that energy is flowing. And so we have to look at the combination. As we said, all things in combination, we have to combine the binding and the flowing to facilitate an existence. So there is a sequence in terms of this existence. So when we're talking about gravitational force fields, that is attraction. And that attraction is our feedback. And so the magnetical field forces are repulsion. That is what we're getting fed. That is the feeding. But we have choices. And because we are plasma beings, those choices are self-serving. And so we, as the last man standing, has the choices to turn on and turn off the feeding, increase or decrease the strength, enhance or diminish the positioning. But when we look at our society, where the stronger eats the weaker, in the plasma science, the stronger feeds the weaker. And so that automatically imparts a responsibility on us. And so the planet has a responsibility in terms of providing life. And so the universal solvent of life on this planet is water. And it is composed, as we said, of the hydrogen and the oxygen. And because of its ability to be a solvent, then the ability to shear off one of the hydrogens as an energy donor is quite easy. And so this process is going all the time. It never stops. And the earth is covered with water all over the place. And we are filled with water. And so this effect is what allows life to work on this planet. And so in the way the energy is coming and conveyed, energy can cross over or it can deflect, or it can get into a twisting scenario And that twisting can actually end up in a tightening, a coiling, or a manifestation of a tunneling. So this energy that is always in motion comes in the form of an energy pack. And if you've ever received a package from the post office, you know it comes in a parcel. And that parcel is also comprised of energy. So the energy that's in that parcel is the principal matter. And that principal matter is magnetical because it's giving. And it gives and comes and interacts. And so we have the combination and convergence of principal matter, transition matter, and matter gen. And from there, we can do the conversion, into a plasma gen. That plasma gen is a representative of the field interactions, which manifest as a maggraph, and that manifestation process is called inertia. And that maggraph process is unique in each and every position, and is constantly changing. So what we have to understand is that not only is energy in motion, but it's energy in motion in two ways. So we not only have a two-way transmission, which we said is the rotation, but we have the two-way transition, which is the polarity. And we not only said that it was binding, but it's also flowing. And so we see both are represented. But if we look at the principal energy and how these forces come together, so we look at the basis of the creation, the X and Y axis, and some people think when these things come together, well, that's a point of conflict. But that conflict is only apparent from our physical point of view. That conflict, in terms of plasmatic manifestation, is actually a conflict resolution. And that resolution becomes a point of containment. So that containment becomes an energy binding system, and we interpret that as a self-serving need, which is correct, at the expense of others, which is a violation of universal law. Because as each individual needs a self-serving energy binding, someone robbing or stealing or cheating or murdering at your expense is stealing your self-serving binding energy. So this is a violation of universal law. And so that requires a balancing. And so one way is that more and more energy has to come together. And some people interpret that as more and more energy has to be stolen. The thing about energy is that you cannot store it. There is no bank of energy, if you will. There's one plasma rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So if someone were to be of the opinion that they have a higher strength because of the gathering of all this energy and storing it, they will understand that they actually have to give that energy if they want to maintain a maggraph position, to resolve that conflict point and turn it into a binding zone. And that binding zone becomes part of the creation and becomes part of a balanced field. So this is how we establish the field capture, where we take into the third dimension the z-axis transition. And so the x, y, and z-axis coming together manifests a field. But that field is constantly changing its position. So what is the difference in that position? So we find that energy, the principal matter that came to facilitate the original creation of matter, actually keeps coming. And it keeps coming in different field strengths. And so each field strength has a different strength. It also has a different intensity. So if you were to say, for instance, that the matter energy level is 1/10 of the energy level of the dark matter, it may be arithmetically possible to increase the amount of matter energy level that you get to equal the dark matter energy level. That's a lot to ask. We are quite happy when we can get a 10% increase in our energy level. So not 100%, not 1,000%. And if we were to go to the antimatter energy level, which is another order of magnitude, so now 10 times 10, we would have to increase our energy level by 100. But that is a straight line arithmetic relationship. It does not take into account the synergy that is developed when 1 and 1 is more than 2. So when we're looking at the principal matter interaction, we understand, yes, there's an equatorial rotating arrival. There's also a polar interaction, but there are different field strengths within that field. So we are able to get different kinds of energy packs depending on the common denominator. So what we achieve in terms of physicality is a form artifact. And really, realistically and truly, since the creator created it, all of it is an art form. But each of us are artists in our own way. And some of us look beyond the physical art form, and we decide to sculpt our philosophy, structure our mind, or structure someone else's mind. In other words, interfere, intervene, and dominate. And so a lot of us have to ponder our existence to figure out what kind of art form are we? Because the way we were created is not the way that we conduct ourselves in society. And so we have to recognize that there's energy in motion. And so our physicality depends on the gravitational nature of the hexagonal crystalline structure and the reception of the sugar energy, which is in the pentagonal crystalline structure. And so the sugar energy is giving to the hexagonal, and in that process loses its conformity, and it has to, by nature, change its susceptibility. But in that process, it creates this twisting we keep talking about. And that twisting lends itself to setting up a pattern which involves a coiling. And the reason it's a coiling is because, did we say that it's always in motion? So even if it's going in a circular manner, it is still moving along another plane. So this is how we see spiral growth, but not in one dimension. We have to see it in different dimensions. And that is only 3 dimensions on one plane of reference. But we have many different planes of reference. And so each plane has to have a folding reference. And that folding reference deviates dependent on the nearness and proximity. And so we see the creation of an amino acid star formation as it's manifest in the solar system. And we see the complementarity between the solar system and the human body and the fundamental components of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. There's a distinct rigidness of the human body, which facilitates our existence in the physicality, and that is calcium. And calcium is ever present in each and every cell in our body. And so when we think of calcium, we think of it in its solid state, our bone structure. But calcium can be in like a cartilage, or it can be in a soluble state. So how do we have three different energy states of calcium? Well, so we have to understand the Maggrath principle, the bringing together of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter, as we said. And then, of course, we have the polarity, which we have to understand that we don't look for heaven, we are in heaven. And there's different ways to go on the stairways to heaven. One way, of course, is counterclockwise, and another way is to go clockwise. And what's kind of interesting is that this follows a pattern. And if we were to change that pattern and go through a perpendicular relationship, we can create a tunneling effect. And it too spirals. But that spiral is constantly in motion. And the relative motion of that spiraling is what we call a precession. So in other words, it is always moving nearer and nearer and nearer. But what is really wonderful when you understand these patterns of counterclockwise and clockwise rotation is the kind of form artifact that is created from this rotation. So it's a manifestation of art form, isn't it? Where one is counterclockwise and the other one is clockwise, or you understand that it's a spiral precession. However you want to look at it, it's a manifestation of the form artifact. And so when we're talking today about cornerstones, let's talk about cornerstones of prejudice. Because literally, the prejudice is manifested in the monuments to form artifacts of man space. But there are other cornerstones that are monuments to form artifacts of earth space. And we can see both of these. But there are monuments to form artifacts of outer space. So we see the form artifacts, but we don't recognize that they're from outer space. And we have difficulty explaining it. And so these become the cornerstones of prejudice. You can't explain it, so it doesn't exist. But in fact, these are cornerstones of creation. So these cornerstones of creation allow us the ability to create artwork. And so I referenced Pierluigi Nervi, famous Italian architect, and he believed that the form is the art. And so the buildings that he was an architect of in Italy as many of these buildings, they are actually monuments. You could say that they're monuments to greatness. Yes, they are, because they're great buildings. But they're monuments to architecture, because they're monuments to form as art. So he doesn't create the art. He creates the form as a foundation of the structure and the manifestation therefrom becomes the art. So when we look at the pyramids, this is a different kind of cornerstone. We have a capstone. And what is interesting here is we have this precision construction of a pyramid and this poor quality finish. So is this a monument to civilization, or is this a monument to nuclear war? And we say that we don't know how these pyramids were built, but we haven't been able to replicate that, with the key word being built. But we sure do know how to cut it. We sure do know how to manipulate stone. And so in our ways of manipulating stone, we're wondering if with a sledgehammer and a chisel, we built the pyramids. Or did we understand the nature of diamonds? Because let's face it, without the diamonds, it would be very difficult to cut these stones. Diamonds are on the cutting edge of technology. They're not just a girl's best friend, but they help us in polishing stones. So after we cut these stones, we'd like to have a nice shiny surface. And wouldn't you know it that we use rotating wheels to create this shiny surface? And we use mixtures of oxides. So in chemistry, GaNs is referred to as an oxide. And of course, the stones are alkaline. So oxalic acid, which is one of the strongest acids known, and this strong acid is what we produce in our stomach. Isn't that interesting? But this strong acid has highly acidic. Well, stones are highly alkaline, so one of the ways to polish the material is to use a strong acid to facilitate the polishing with the rotating wheels. Well, what are the diamonds? So we understand with the nano alignment, we create a nano carbon crystal. It's a monatomic alignment. And this monatomic alignment is a diamond. So as part of the nano coating, in, shall we say, scientific terms, the nano coating is represented by the electrons of an sp3 hybridized atom, and are known to be farther from the nucleus than those in an sp2 hybridized species. So the sp2 hybrid species are more stable than the sp3 hybrid species. So the stability is rated and is greater when the electrons are close to the nucleus. Well, when the electrons are closer to the nucleus, it means that it's more dense. And how dense is it? But because of the nanocoating process, we also have gaps. I think we can all conclude that these gaps are not very dense. And so in the process of having the nanocoating, which is very dense, and the gaps, which is not very dense, and we have millions of nanoparticles, and so therefore we have millions of gaps. And so as a result, we have millions of dynamic plasmatic reactors because of the balance of the magnetic and gravitational field forces. And so here's a new word for the day: carbanions. And they are trivalent. with the sp3 hybridization. So the lone pair of electrons occupies one of the sp3 orbitals. And the geometry is tetrahedral. And this tetrahedron can undergo inversion. And it can retain what we call its stereochemistry depending on the attached substituents. And as we know, the nano layers are also tetrahedrons. But now something really interesting happens. The sp2 hybridization of carbon atoms resulting in the formation of sigma and 2 pi. Oh, we get 2 pi's this time. The bonds occur in compounds containing double bonds like alkenes. sp3, when a carbon atom makes 4 bonds with others, it is referred to as sp3 hybridization, which can be with the hydrogen and halogen atoms. Well, isn't that interesting? So now we have nano tetrahedrons. And of course, that's how we produce the nanostars, right? So the sp3 orbital is one of a set of hybrid orbitals produced when one s orbital and 3 p orbitals are combined mathematically to form 4 new equivalent orbitals oriented towards the corners of a regular tetrahedron. And so we understand that in the corners are usually cornerstones. And depending on the density, we have the Earth space range details, which we have put together in the periodic table of elements. And we find that we have all the periodic table of elements on Earth that were created through this process. And some are stones. And we know that each stone has a soul as well. So going from this magnetical state down to this highly dense gravitational state, the purpose of which is to facilitate an anchorage. And of course, in that process, we'd like to commemorate that with a cornerstone or maybe a statue. Yes, let's create a statue and let's idolize that statue, right? Because that acknowledges our existence. And so that idol is a confirmation of our existence. Substitute your existence for an idol. And substitute every element on the periodic table of elements for this third rock from the sun. And then leave a commemoration, leave a cornerstone and say, yep, I was here. And so this is the nature of the cornerstone, you see, because it's the architect's stamp, which says, I built this. And so in relation to architecture, a cornerstone is traditionally the first stone laid for a structure. And all the other stones are laid in reference. But also more importantly, and not so much today, but it marks the geographical location by orienting a building in a specific direction. And so we see that cornerstones have been around for millennia in some shape or form. Well, one use of cornerstones is as monuments. So in the United States, we have monuments to greatness. One of the shrines of democracy in America is Mount Rushmore, which features 60-foot faces of 4 great American presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln, respectively. And then, of course, in ancient times, we have other cornerstone monuments. And these are monuments to artisans. Or is it monuments to graffiti? Then we have other monuments. Are these monuments to vandalism? I mean, who puts the face of a man on the body of a lion? And then there are other stones, we call them keystones. And they are very important because they're monuments to architecture. And they facilitate the curvature of the dome. The last stone in the center locks all the stones in the archway. Without that keystone, the archway will fall down. And so they're all interlocked. They're all interdependent. And they form a curvature, which is a combination of all the straight lines that were used to make the stones, all the cutting that was done. And these monuments to architecture have lasted an extremely long time. Some of them don't last that long. Some of them are tombstones. They're gravestones. Or in the town named Tombstone, the famous gunfight at the OK Corral. It's representative of the historical soul. And there are many there who left their soul and may they rest in peace. But not only, this is the habit of the man. Prepare the gravestones and prepare the graves and turn the earth space into a graveyard. Sure, let's turn it all into a graveyard. Look at this societal cornerstone where you have the verification and validation that you cannot take it with you. So we have the preservation of form artifacts, where we can carve out everlasting statues and everlasting soldiers to protect the everlasting body and an everlasting money. What are the cornerstones of science? We have the nano cornerstone, the pico cornerstone, the Gans cornerstone, the plasma cornerstone, and the soul cornerstone. So when we look at the soul cornerstone, we see that it is a convergence of the star formation of the basic amino life, the amino acid, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and the hydrogen. But the way it functions is you have to open to the energies of the universe and allow it to come in. You have to yield to those forces so that you can receive. you have to provide the pattern so that you get the energy. And so whatever you get, you have to understand that you've created that. And that cornerstone is not in the corner. That corner is in the soul. That corner is in the center of the star formation. The carbon is that cornerstone, but that carbon has a connectivity. So we see that there's a plasma cornerstone, which reflects on the magnetical connectivity. And there's a plasma cornerstone that reflects on the gravitational connectivity. And as they say, the sp3 tetrahedral conversion is in the corners of the tetrahedron. Well, here's one, here's two, here's three, and that makes your base, your gravitational base. And here's four. And so now you have a combination of plasma cornerstones, but the amalgamation of all the cornerstones together comes in the center, not in the corner. And so here we are on the verge of manifesting the oasis cornerstone. And you wonder which direction it's going. It's going to position itself by nearness and proximity through the cornerstone of connection, wherever that is. Because that is what you see in the carbon spectrum, the gravitational conformation, unique manifestation in a color blended signature coming from the magnetical field forces of the interaction of the sun, the earth, and the creator. And so we see the changes based on the density. Gravity seeks density. And the density operates within the Coulomb barrier. And so whatever is in the Maggrav state is constantly in balance. And so that balance is the pH of strength, where you have the crossing over of the susceptibility between the potential and the kinetic energies. And you can transition from one point of uncut physicality to another point of uncut existence through the y-axis transition dimensions, and understand that each point on the pH scale has a corresponding point to balance it. So how do we go from the lower transmission scale to the higher transmission scale, which now has gaps? So we go through this transition of the transmission elemental susceptibility. And in that process, we create the manifestation of the cornerstone of transmutation. It's all based on relationships, the magnetical gravitational balance, which we call the Maggrav, and with the scientific community that only looks at the conservation of energy, and the spiritual community is just looking at the battle between the spirit and the soul. So the plasma science adds to the knowledge by facilitating a balance to these relationships. And so we see, due to the independent variableness of all of us, there's a conservation of variability involving the magnetical and gravitational field forces on both sides of the equation, So we have a balanced MAGRAV regardless of what the susceptibility is on both sides of the equation. But the balance remains, but the susceptibility changes. And so we have this plasma shift where we can go from the energy state of heat and electricity, which is the lowest energy state, and understand how we can transcend nuclear physics, which is a higher energy state. But we see that as a state of destruction, and only because we don't use the plasma physics to balance it off and make it the structure of creation. And then from there, advance into the dynamic plasma state and the interactive energy transfer states that allow us to follow the energy states of the universe. Because as we go from the atomic state to the nano state to the GAN state, wherever we are, there is always a balance of the matter-gen convergence and susceptibility, what we call the MAGRAV energy transfer state. So we can keep that balance and transcend various energy states. And if we can do that in the matter state, we can definitely do that in the plasma state. So the matter plasma dimension is already next to the plasmatic state. And the only difference is that one is physical and one is non-tangible. So we can advance from the matter state and understand that what we're seeing is a feedback summary. And so we see that things where we have sound, light, heat, and pressure can affect our interpretation. But humanity is quarantined in the spherical Earth space. And so the only reference we make of cornerstones is these are the form artifacts often referred to as the transmutation of life. And that is a very, very, very hard life. So we're looking at the potentiation of balance. And so we're saying that that balance in terms of the manifestation of the cornerstones of our existence are form artifacts of the balance of the energies coming from the universe. So even when we're looking at the cornerstones of balance in a form artifact, if you look closely, you can see the layers. And you can see the form artifacts of erosion. Can you see the form artifact of cutting technology? Can you see the form artifact of sudden events? Or would you say that this job is finished? Is this a monument to greatness built on a solid foundation? This is a monument to balance. It's a gravitational confirmation. Oxygen is the fundamental gravitational component of our Earth space. And as such, it has a unique fingerprint as well, made from a color spectrum, a representation of the coming together of the field forces of the sun and the field forces of the earth and the field forces of the creator, and manifesting themselves in a gravitational field on earth. And so that's what makes this the blue planet, the water planet. But it's a two-way transmission. It's a two-way street. And we're part of that. And so when we look at the fingerprints, the transmission spectrum, what they are is a transition of visible transmission spectrums from spectrum to spectrum susceptibility. And it's a difference between the surface superficiality of the physicality and the internal substance of the plasma substrate. And so the balance between the gravitational and magnetical force fields is the point of containment. And in our physicality, it manifests a signature in color. But we know now that in the non-visible state, we can also maintain this point of containment of the gravitational and magnetical field forces. And we also now know that we can go one step beyond, because we have the form artifacts, don't we? The magrav state, which is atomic, the nanostate, which is monatomic, the GaN state, which is polyatomic, and the plasma state, which is a field. And we now know that we can go one step beyond. But we've always had the barrier in the physicality, and that physicality always manifests itself as a rock solid cornerstone of existence. But see, there are cornerstones of spheres, and the problem with spheres is that they are in 3 dimensions and they don't have corners. So what we have is a manifestation of monuments of litter here or here or here or here. And we were in the post-Sagnac conference era. There's gold in them that are cornerstones. So what are we fighting for? If we want to look at how we target our outer space, we have to determine what is the cornerstone of our existence in this manifestation point, which we call Earth space, and what is the gravitational point in some other space. So yes, we have to have a direction. We have to have a cornerstone locating the point of manifestation and the point of transmutation. The difference between materialization and dematerialization as we transcend the reality dimension. So our antennas need to be tuned into the message feeding and the feedback manifestation. So that's what tunes the transition, where you select one force, which is magnetical, and the balance is forced into a gravitational balancing force called a gravitational field force. And the resulting selections feed the magrav manifestation of these interactions. So you select one manifestation and it's predetermined by choosing another. And we are the last man standing, and we can choose the peace dome of intention. So the range transition affects standard folding deviation and leaves no room for war. This is why the Z-axis transition has to balance to and from the peace dome. And the peace dome is not put together by a sledgehammer, but it's a plasma balance between the knowledge and wisdom, which can only give us deeper insight. And so this experience on this planet will change a man's perspective and allows us to reflect on life. And we could see and ponder that misconduct becomes harder to rationalize. The historical references really become meaningless because the pH balance is seeking polar balance. The plasma balance is uncut in any state. State dependency and transcendence is uncut. Cornerstones are cut. Cornerstones are matter state bound. So, what is the cornerstone of your MAGRAV positioning? Look at the blue planet. That's our cornerstone. We have landed here. And our cornerstone is peace. And so we're in the process of doing a transmutation test. We're halfway through. And this is a series of 4 months. And so there's another one coming up in September. Please join us. Exciting experience. And if you're a researcher, join our research teams. The plasma science has only, shall we say, scratched the surface. We have been trying for 553 weeks in a row to bring the Knowledge Seekers workshops to facilitate the cornerstone of greater oneness by transcending the limitations of nuclear science. Now, we have done that. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. There's a World Peace Treaty. We need to sign it with strong and firm intention. And so we see that the z-axis dimension causes the x-axis sphere creation, and man is the reactor of a three-dimensional universe. And man can find heaven through this field transition. But can man go into outer space without a peace dome? Not likely. Can man transmute through the dimensions of history? Cornerstones litter the navigation routes of the physical transmission dimensions. It's time for us to clean up our act. Plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the Peace Dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of this lesson. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
Okay, thank you again, Alex, for delivering right on time, just the right amount. And well, you're still using a few big words that I don't quite understand. Polyatomic, I guess it just means more than one atom. And some other things, but we thank you for delivering and sharing knowledge as we learn from each other. Everyone has knowledge I don't have, and I may have some knowledge that others don't have. So it's a beautiful interchange, in a way, balancing or bringing up the weaker plasma to the stronger plasma, even if, as we heard, if it goes above our field strength, which is perfectly fine. Let's see if any of the participants this week have a question they'd like to present, or some anomaly in the workshop that they're not quite understanding. Let's open the floor.
I would like to address a question that Ike and Gail asked.
Sure.
I've been looking for a way to describe this new alignment that we need. And I talked about the synchronicity of the hemispheres, hemispheric synchronicity. if we, as per the teachings of Carlos Castaneda, well, actually the teachings of Don Juan, because Castaneda was his student, but he talked about the assemblage point. And I often wondered what this assemblage point was, but I think going through the transmutation training process, my personal belief is that I've achieved that. I've seen a lot of things in my life that are working an awful lot better. And obviously that's my goal. But what's really interesting is I've been doing it without frustration or fighting. And so, I'm just like everybody else. There's lots to learn and long way to go to maturity, but we keep on going. The assemblage point is something, if I could liken it to assembling a car. An assemblage point is an assembly of points. And if you look at a car, and normally a car has 4 wheels. And so if you look at the front 2 wheels, those are the steering wheels. And if they are in alignment, you'll go straight down the road. And if you turn the steering wheel, it'll go straight that way too. So by aligning the left and right front wheel, you are creating a directional flow. Obviously, if the rear wheels are out of alignment, and some people, when they track the wheels of a car that's been in an accident, that they call it a dog walker, because it kind of walks cockeyed, so it doesn't track properly. But if you can get the alignment of the rear wheels, so the left and right rear wheels are working in one direction, and if you have the rear wheels balanced and the front wheels balanced, and you put those two together, now you have a car that'll drive straight and true down the center of the highway, between the white lines, between the ditches. And of course, what you need is a driver, who in this case would be the soul of the car. So if we look at the front wheels as being the brain and the rear wheels being the heart, and this would of course be a rear wheel drive car. So when you have the inspiration to drive forward, when you have the emotion that you want to go, then the rear wheels spin and the front wheels point the direction, and they all work together. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think this is a perfect analogy of an assembly point realignment. And if you think of a misalignment as pulling one way or the other, pulling left or right, something you would find if the air in the tires is not balanced, you will find that it won't be balanced in the direction that you drive. Well, the thing is, the car is a physical thing, but the trip is in the mind of the driver. And the destination for the car is in the mind of the driver, not in the mind of the car itself. So the physical manifestation of these alignments, represented as a physical assembly of the car, but the smooth operation of the vehicle is in the alignment and assembly of the points of balance of all the components that we've discussed. The alignment of the front wheels, the alignment of the back wheels, the alignment of the combination of the four wheels, and the alignment of the driver. And that, I think, makes for a beautiful picture. So let's step on the gas and get out of here. I hope that helps.
You talked about Mr. Kesh talked about this heart beating, and being misaligned causes it to beat too rapidly, I guess. There's only so many beats it can do. So if we can get it lined up and we can reduce its beating to say half, from maybe 70 beats a minute to 35, would that, do you think, extend our existence on this planet? He said the misalignment is the heart is one of the reasons for the shortness of the life. But again, I don't think we're physically moving the heart. It's the energies of the heart that needs to be center lined with the brain and so on. But this would seem a very simple way to double your life expectancy just by controlling this somehow.
Oh yeah, I agree with you, Mark. So I think the thing is, however, that as you said earlier, it's not the physical alignment of the heart, but it's the physical. It's the I'm sorry, the alignment of the left side, left and right hemispheric alignment of the heart. You see, the thing about it is that
You're saying the tilting, similar to the tilt of the earth?
exactly, yes. The hemispheric synchronization of the heart, okay, is vertical. The hemispheric synchronization of the brain is vertical, right? If we're looking at the polarity is running from the head to the toe. And so if we look at the alignment of the body, we can identify we have a left side of the body and the right side of the body. And so that is all vertical, right? Except for one thing. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. So there is a crossover. So how does the interaction, or shall we say the hemispheric synchronicity of the crossover, affect the hemispheric synchronicity of the individual components? And so there has to be an alignment of the assemblage point between the two fields. So what we find is that there is a emotional representation that comes from our plasmatic nervous system, if you will, and it's manifested in the physical nervous system. And so the plasmatic nervous system is part of the feeding system that comes from the brain, and the physical nerve system is coming from the feedback system from the heart. And so we find that the degeneration of the physical nervous system is from a misalignment of the plasmatic nervous system. We call the plasmatic nervous system the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And so it's activated by the cortisol response, which comes from the brain, and the activation and response from the adrenal glands. And so the balance of these two systems will represent the balance of your existence. And if you are constantly stressed in that regard, depending on the condition of the stress, it can be annealing, where it makes you stronger, or it can drain you of energy, in which case it makes you weaker. And so your point of view with respect to this has a big impact, because it's your point of view that is facilitating the assemblage point. You're the one who assembles the assemblage point. And so if we are over dominant with respect to the physicality, then we are basically shifting that assemblage point over and putting it out of alignment. But likewise, the other is true. If we are over dominant with respect to our spirituality or so-called spirituality, then we are ignoring our physicality. And in many ways, then we can become irresponsible, because we say, oh, everything we can do is manifest through our spirituality, so we don't have to take care of our physicality. Well, I beg to differ. Taking care of our spirituality and our physicality is paramount, because that becomes our responsibility, with the key word being responsible. So we cannot delegate that responsibility, and we cannot abdicate that responsibility. So, we can recline in our cushiness, and say, well, I just want to be in a very positive environment where everything's warm and fuzzy, or I want to be down and dirty where everything is blood, sweat, and tears. Well, we have to find a balance between the two, because what is going on this planet is in extremes. So who is the mitigator of these extremes? It's us. It's us. We are the balancing interventionists. And in order to facilitate that, we have to have the vitality and the balance to be able to do that. And it really helps if we have the knowledge and wisdom, which of course, over time, contributes to our maturity. So that is what we call the maturation process. And in that process, then we understand that we are passengers of the universe. We are part of the universe. We cannot be extricated from the universe. Cannot stick a syringe in the universe and extricate us from that. And the physical manifestation is a gift. We need to treat it as a gift and not disrespect it and saying, well, I was here. Here is my cornerstone. Here is my legacy. And here's the message that I want to leave on my tombstone. And if we were to say, well, I have achieved greatness in my vocation, and so here lies the body of a great scientist. Here lies the body of a great gunfighter. Oh, maybe here lies the body of a great garbage man. We are all great in our own way, and we are all great as contributors to this universe. But the greatness is not measured by what we leave behind. The greatness is measured by what we create. And so we don't leave just a cornerstone which points in the direction that we haven't figured out yet. The cornerstone is within our soul. And that soul interacts with other souls. And all the souls work together with the soul of the earth, the soul of the sun, and the soul of the solar system and the universe. And that's the cornerstone. That's the cornerstone we need to focus on. And understand that whatever we're manifesting in the physicality is part of that reality and comes from that reality. And it's a wonderful thing. That's absolutely a wonderful thing. So we didn't run away from chaos to come here. And when we leave here, we're not going to run away to chaos. We came from a place of organization. We came from a place of peace. And we came to a place of chaos because we were called. We were the balancers, the Magrav balancing force. Because when you have the pH of one, you need to balance it off with the pH of the other. And the pH and the physicality does not necessarily get balanced with the pH in the physicality. We can transcend different energy states. So the call to us in our energy state was one side of the pH balance equation, and the call of the earth was in the other side of the pH balance equation. And so you have to decide, are you the creator and enhancer of the problem, or are you the creator and enhancer of the solution? And you can measure that each and every day very, very easily, and you don't need a ruler to do that. And just say, is this world better for me having been here? And when we say better, it means enhancing the energy level of all beings on this universe. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And maybe this alignment will happen as we get rid of some of this. I'm just looking at the transcript here. He said extra atmosphere, emotion, attachment, and everything else. If we can handle that or bring this into some sort of balance or detach from some of these things we've created, maybe the heart just automatically, or the energies of it, comes in line. I don't think it'll be any surgical operation. If anything, it'll be a plasmatic, but it does seem that if you can get rid of some of these attachments, the heart will go into a place where it doesn't have to be. He said we don't need such a high energy heartbeat. We can slow this down. And perhaps that's the key, one of the keys to longevity. Let's see if anyone else has a question or a thought they'd like to share with the rest of us. Okay. You talked about littering in space, and I remember one clip that we played about we can't even leave our bodies in certain locations. It's like a picnic. When you go into the park and you leave all your bottles and napkins and all the things you disposed of where you had your picnic there, this is litter. And he said, even if we go to other planets and we create a manifestation of a physicality there, we can't litter all over the universe. We have to clean up after ourselves. So this is another aspect which, again, we don't think we need the physical body, but he's saying about not littering here or anywhere else across the universe. So we must be able to clean up in a way after ourselves. Maybe we'll reach that point in the future or understand how to do that exactly. Although we do have reports of monks disappearing with their physicality into a point of light and other things, so it's definitely a possibility. But I don't think, I think we just think we can leave the physicality wherever it was and create another one in another planet or another dimension, but then we do the same thing. And he said, this is not acceptable. We cannot litter. The same way it's frowned upon here, more or less.
Well, I want to draw your attention to the fact that, we have monuments. And so the reason we build these monuments is to glorify our physicality. But, so we're actually using the monument as a cornerstone to say, yeah, we were here and now we're not here. But that cornerstone is only there because we were here. And if we didn't come here, that cornerstone wouldn't be there. So that cornerstone doesn't really belong there. It's not part of the there. It's not part of the environment. It's only part of the environment because we made it so. So if we're doing that with monuments, then, we're also doing it with our chemical pollution and our manufacturing pollution, and we're also doing it with our mental pollution. So it's nice to be able to say, oh, I can leave. I can leave anytime. Well, there's some people who should leave, and the sooner the better, because when they go to bed at night, they can look back and see on all the chaos and damage that they have created. But there's a fearfulness because there's a balancing that's going to happen. And only by retaining in the physical dimension can they delay these consequences. But, if they start to go into plasma state, they're not going to be able to delay that any longer. They're going to come face to face with it, and then they will feel the pain. And the fear of that pain is actually what's driving them to be delinquent. But that is still in a matter state condition. It's non-tangible, non-visible, but it's like the field around the Gans particles. The Gans is physical, but the field strength is plasmatic. Where we have gone now with the new technology is we have gone several energy states higher. So we are no longer operating in that low environment energy state where we can even have the benefit of a delay in consequences. The only way that we can have this nearness and proximity is to cross over from the lowest energy state of the high plasmatic state and have it interact with the highest energy state of the lower matter state. That's the only way that we can do it at this point in time. And it would be totally irresponsible, and that's just my opinion, to leave this unfinished business behind. But this problem on this planet has been created by many, many souls, and as such it is grossly unfair, regardless of field strength, for one soul to rectify the whole thing. So it becomes a collective soul. And that collective soul, again, cannot operate on the humanity soul exclusively. It has to incorporate the soul of the plants and the soul of the horizontal people and the soul of the earth and the soul of the sun. And, we don't really have to look far. All we have to do is, look at central Mexico and find that there are pyramids there that are completely overrun with vegetation. And so the pyramid being the cornerstone of somebody's existence, right? They're gone, but they've left their residue. They've left their litter behind. Well, the vertical people have overrun it. So who's stronger? Who actually is stronger? Who actually is more mature? So the vertical people are doing what they can to benefit the environment.
Right. We've already started littering on the moon. I think we've left rovers and other tools up there. And of course, the same thing has happened on Mars, that I think a couple of these rovers have broken down. And then I was just looking this morning where they had one of these Chinese March rockets, or long rockets, I guess. Apparently it launched about 16 something 18 satellites, but then when it jettisoned the booster, apparently it exploded into 1,000 pieces. And they're saying this will be the first time man has created a meteor shower of sorts. We'll have to see, but it can also affect other satellites that are up there. So traveling in the matter state has a lot of, in a way, disadvantages to the universe. Unless, of course, the universe has garbage men the way we do here and they clean up after the inhabitants, but I don't think so. I think it's much safer to travel in this energy dimension rather than in the matter state, but we have to accommodate everyone. But yes, we're already littering across the universe, I think. We've only made it just so far. Okay, who else would like to bring something up here? Did you stump all our participants, Alex? Or just part of them? You know, I'm thinking of the matter state plasma versus a plasmatic state of the plasma. When we see a lightning orb, or we see an orb in the woods, would you consider that a matter state plasma because we can see it, versus a field interaction or a field plasma, which we really can't see? Just to take up that question on orbs and the difference between a matter state plasma and a plasmatic state of the plasma. If you'd like to address.
Yes, of course, Mark. So your home has neighbors. So your home has to take into account those neighbors, right? Like, in order for you to know where your home is between those neighbors. It's not between just any neighbors, it's between those neighbors. So you don't know what's in there. And maybe you don't care as long as it's peaceful. But the thing is that they, by extension, are part of your environment. So the plasma state in the matter state is the neighbor of the GANS. So the GANS in its existence is determined by the relationship of GANSes to GANSes and plasma to nano, where nano is in the lower energy state, the plasma is in the higher energy state, so the GANS state is in the in-between state. And so when we do the cup of life, we are incorporating a physical state, and we're drawing the GANSes from the atmosphere, but not so much the air. We say it's from the air, but the air itself is in a physical state. What we're drawing is how was the air created? So the air created was from a plasmatic state of the air, which is to say, there's a plasma state of hydrogen and a physical state of hydrogen. There's a plasma state of carbon dioxide and a physical state of carbon dioxide.
Right. This is what he's explained. We have CO2 in the matter state and we have CO2 in the plasmatic state. So it's totally, I think, different.
Yeah, and until we, find a practical application such as a fire, and we apply the CO2, which we know it extinguishes the fire. But in the one case we find that everything suffocates, in the other case we find that actually life gets invigorated, and yet we seem to be applying the same product. Well, it seems like it's the same product, but clearly it's not the same product. And I've run into that all the time. If you offer some water to somebody and you say, well, this water has different characteristics, and they say, nah, it's water, it's just water. Well, obviously, lack of education wins, and lack of understanding wins. But I think if you were to make the same claim with the Kalahari Bushmen, and you say, well, gee, how do they get water from the desert? And this guy who says water is just water, well, and that argument, and water is just sand. So, I wonder if we could have the education of the Kalahari Bushmen, in our schools. I think we'd be better for it. So we cannot ostracize or limit or put boundaries in that regard. That the learning and the education transcends various fields, and what limits us is our prejudice. So we have to transcend that prejudice, and we have to understand that our prejudices are based on superficiality. So since the superficiality is manifest by the plasmatic substrate, of which we all have that common denominator, so if our substrate is common, then our superficiality should be common. So it's not a point of discrimination with respect to the superficiality. It is a monument to the variety, the ubiquitous variety and spice of life itself. It's the wonderment of life, and we should cherish that, not penalize that, based on prejudice. That's the difference between prejudice and affinity. So we all need to overcome our prejudices, and within our own soul state, we have things that hold us back, but we cannot just focus on that. And the reason for it is because, as Mr. Kesh said, when you teach others, you actually learn. So, the biggest benefactors of this meeting are you and I, Mark, and that part is totally unfair. I like it. I that's the benefit that I found, because it forces me to learn, and it forces me to also learn how to convey that message. It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge, but it's very, very important, because I'm thinking, do you understand what I'm saying? Am I conveying that information in a meaningful way? And if I'm not, then I have to change, because if you don't get any benefit from what I'm saying, then what's the point? So I have a responsibility, and I'm trying my best, but the measuring stick is what we accomplish as a result. And what we are accomplishing in these meetings is non-tangible. And it's non-specific, because these meetings are recorded. So I'm not talking to you and the panelists, but it's beyond that as well. So I'm not saying this as if it's a preaching or, standing on a pedestal. I'm just saying to you that this is all part of the process, and it's part of the maturation process. And I think it's also part of the identification of the purpose of our existence. Because anytime if you measure your existence, you say, oh, you know, I have come to this planet so that I can enhance my soul, and then I can leave, and you know, you guys figure it out. I think that's a job unfinished, but that's my opinion. So I think that's one of the reasons that we're sticking it out, because otherwise, if we don't have the attitude that we have heaven on earth, then, you know, relatively speaking, we don't have, we have chaos on earth, relatively speaking. Even within that chaos, the earth is managing, but the earth is asking for help. And isn't it nice to be helpful? Back to you, Mark.
Very. Thank you, Alex. Anyone else want to pose a question or a comment? Again, nobody's wrong and nobody's 100% right. And we're not grading Alex or anyone else in this meeting, especially me. We talk about or you've talked about the stronger plasma feeding the weaker plasma. You said energy is always in motion. So if the stronger plasma is feeding the weaker plasma and it brings it up to its strength, and maybe there's a balance point, like at that point where the fields cross in the infinity loop, is the energy, once these two plasmas are in balance, is the energy still moving? Or there's no need because now both are in equal balance? I would think the energy continues to move to
Oh, of course
maintain
it
that
does.
balance. Okay.
Yes, yes, of course. You cannot stop the energy from moving. Okay, so if the energy is constantly coming and then to get absorbed, it is seeking its position. And that position is always based on the nearness and proximity to its neighbors. So if the neighbors are moving, it has to move. And if it's moving, then the neighbors have to accommodate. And so one leads to the other, leads to the other. So the way it was explained to me a long time ago, and how profound this is, on that basis, if you were just to wave your hand, just, you know, take your hand and cross your body and then just wave like you're waving a wand, that motion is felt in some degree thousands of, shall we say, thousands of miles away, you know, for sake of a description. It's way beyond, let's put it this way, it's way beyond that you could throw a ball. Way beyond. So how can you impact the way beyond? Simply by waving your hand as if it were a wand. And that is because you have exchanged energy with respect to that motion. And you have changed the nearness and proximity. And everything, every neighbor has had to adjust. And every neighbor has a neighbor. Okay, so neighbor to neighbor, neighbor to neighbor, neighbor to neighbor. It has to adjust. So everything that we do is affecting everything that's going on in the universe. So on the plasma basis, it can absorb fields and it can be a barrier of fields. And this is a unique characteristic of the plasma, which is the way we see it with respect to boundaries. And so all we have to look at is the boundaries that we have on this planet, which are based on nationalism, if you will, or by geographic territory, but birds don't respect it. Religions certainly don't respect it. So what's the point of having boundaries? What is the point? The whole point is to maintain peace. Well, why? Why do we need to maintain those boundaries for peace? What's wrong with having peace with no boundaries? Birds don't seem to have a problem. I don't see, an army of seagulls coming and attacking an army of chickadees. You know, they navigate around each other. They share the space and they cross over borders. So if they can do it, what's our problem? What is our problem? Why can't we do it? And why don't we do it? Wouldn't life be a whole lot simpler? I know it would be a whole lot better. And, isn't that what makes life wonderful? So there are uneducated people who don't understand those philosophies. And through the nearness and proximity to those people, their neighbors are suffering the same way. And we are all in that same quarantine because, it's convenient. So we are the garbage litterers on this planet. And as you said, there's litter on the moon, litter on Mars. So we find that the malady that is affecting us is also affecting the moon and Mars. Okay, so how far does this go, and where is the boundary of the quarantine? Well, within the physicality, it's in the range that we can see. And the only thing that we can see is the Earth space, the in-between space, the sun space, the moon space. What we don't see is the outer space. And so our inability to enter into outer space is the boundary of the quarantine. And now we know that we can actually interact in our space with outer space. And if we can do it in our space, we can do it in any space. Thank you very much, everybody, for allowing me to present today.
Anyone else who would like to bring a thought or a comment or a question? Thank you, Alex. I know it's not easy being a demigod or a half a god, as they say. As Mr. Kesh said, a half a doctor is a threat to life, but we're learning. I think we're gaining this aspect, and certainly previous civilizations on this planet have had aspects of zero time communication, growing limbs, flying and manifesting themselves in different positions. Hopefully we're on the uptake of knowledge again, and this time we can create a permanent peaceful condition and not lose it as we have in the past. I think we've operated much differently in the past than we're doing today, but we sort of devolved into this, and now I think we're on an uptick, especially with the help of the Kesh Foundation, the universal community, and the creator in so many ways, which is you.
Well,
And me. Yes.
when I was a kid, we had a TV series called The Lone Ranger, and he would single-handedly come in and, shall we say, clean up a social problem.
Oh, you must have been a kid when I was a kid. I remember that.
Okay, well, that makes me younger. So anyway, the thing is that at the end of the series, of course, he'd say, "Hi-yo, Silver and away," and where's he going? He has come, he has resolved, he has cleaned everything up, and now he's leaving. And it's a job well done, right? And what is he doing? He's leaving everybody else there to carry on. And so the idea is, well, he's going somewhere else, right? But why doesn't he stick around? Why does he have to leave? I always wonder, well, like, why are you leaving? You finally got it the way you needed to have it. You know, it's like you come into a house and the house is a mess and you clean up the house and it's beautiful. And then you say, call the real estate agent, honey, we're leaving. It's like, if you're leaving to get out of Dodge. You're not leaving to get out of paradise, are you? Like, well, I often wonder,
No, I agree. That was the way the feelings of the people that this Long Ranger touched were almost like, oh, stay so we don't have any more problems in the future. But it was really up to them now to carry on with the process. And I think this is very much the same of what Mr. Kesh is doing as this universal teacher. He has another point or another train to catch, as I understand it.
well, in a way, I agree. And then you remember the movie Magnificent Seven, and they did the same thing, but it was a group of them, and they all had different talents, and they all brought it together, and the convergence of all the talents allowed them to clean up the mess. But when it came time to finish and leave, only a couple of them left, and some stayed behind, right? So, we have that choice. And, when you stay behind, that's actually the dirty part, okay? Because what are you left with? You are left with the remnants of the chaos. And, I'll leave one more story. Um, I used to, when I was in my early 20s, I was living in a very fortunate place, and we could have parties. And these parties were fun parties because we had music and we danced. That's what we considered fun. Sorry. But anyway, the thing was, there was a lot of garbage the next day, right? So you have a party Saturday night, Sunday morning, you get up and you look, and the place is a disaster. And I would just have a cup of coffee and sit in the middle of the pile. And in that disaster, well, what appeared to be a disaster, or the remnants of the disaster, I got a lot of satisfaction, because based on an amount of garbage, it seemed to be an indicator of how much fun everybody had. Because that's one of the things that was really amazing. We got so many phone calls afterwards, and so, oh man, did we ever have a lot of fun at your party? And I thought, well, that is such a nice thing to hear. So the amount of garbage and the way it was all there, and I was able to sit there and look, oh, well, there was, Sally, and there was Joe, and there was so and so, and and you sit there and you basically have to party all over again. And it's great. So, we doubled up on our party satisfaction, if you will. And then it was very easy to just clean up. We didn't make a meal of it. We just cleaned it up all together as a team. And it was truly wonderful. And then the house was back to order. Well, I think that is the satisfaction. We now transferred the physical party that we had into a memory. And that memory gave us a lot of pleasure, and that pleasure was everlasting, and it's everlasting today. I enjoyed our parties. I enjoyed our parties. When we first started, it was very stressful to be the host of the party. But if the host can enjoy the party, then I think it's a fun party, and we had fun. Yeah, and we had music. Oh my God, we had fantastic music. But you know what else we did, which was really important and what really brought it to success? We invited our neighbors. Oh, yeah, because at 4 o'clock in the morning, you don't want your neighbors calling the police. So our neighbors were there. They wouldn't dare call the police because they would have a problem. But this is what I'm saying. You and your neighbors in nearness and proximity are all part of the party. I mean, it only makes sense that if you're having a party, you're not going to have the party at the expense of your neighbors, okay? Because that's going to cause grief, isn't it? So is that what you want from a party, is to cause grief? No, I think you want to invite your neighbors. And so that's hard to do today. It really is hard. And, a lot of the disassociation of the new social networks has caused that as a problem. So, I think we need to get back to that and understand the beauty of the interaction of in our physicality as well. So these kind of meetings that we're having are an excellent example of this. So we can't have the nearness and proximity geographically, but we have the nearness and proximity of us on a soul level. And that's what I think gives me the most enjoyment of these meetings. So I think the panelists agree, or they wouldn't be here. But what do they do with that information? And I'm thinking they share it with their friends and their neighbors, and they can go and say, you know what, I was there. I was there. I experienced that. I know what it feels like. And that is something that is very precious. Thank you all. Back to you, Mark.
And of course, unlike the Lone Ranger, where they didn't know where he came from or where he departed to or his name, Mr. Kesh said that his name will be known by all of humanity after he departs and goes to his next destination or whatever he's lined up to do. But we'll all know the Kesh name in the future, the entire humanity. It won't be a mystery. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm just going to take the screen, Alex, and share this one and this one of the three wise men. And of course, this is the ethos of Mitra, the thinking, speaking, and acting good. And this is the ethos to create the soul of the child of Mitra, which all of us can do. And we thank you for your work. Oops, I haven't fully shared. Sorry. But we thank you for the work you're doing. And of course, may you be proud of the work you do. And may you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you're making. And we don't have to see that difference manifest in the matter state, only to know that we've been here to serve. We've given fields, and those fields will manifest at their right time and place for the elevation of the others. So we don't need a confirmation in the matter state. But the three wise men is a very important aspect of our understanding this ethos of Mitra. And it's for each and every one of us to take it upon themselves to apply it. May mean a little bit differently to me than it means to you, but again, you're the captain of your own ship. So we thank you all for being here. And
thank you. It's time for the from the Universal Council say thank you so much, beautiful souls, because you give freely your soul for the peace. Thank you for all with time. You unify your soul because be part the soul of the peace. We are soul of the peace. And you see all news, beautiful news now for the earth. And need continue build that peace. Thank you for you enlighten your behavior according to ethos of the Mitra, ethos of the Creator, of course, into the Keshe Foundation. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos, maravillosos almas. Thank you.